Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So today I have Amy Wood. She's a phenomenal guest. Today we're going to be talking about all about accessibility for your event. But before we dive into that, just giving you all a high level of why we're here and what we're talking about. So I'm Jess. I always forget to introduce myself. But I am Jess. So happy to have you here. I'm the host of this conversation series, and it's really to bring awareness to your planning process in the event and hospitality marketing industry, and having conversations with folks who, I believe are experts in their field and bring such passion to what they do and the conversations that we have. So I'm so happy to have Amy Wood here. She's from the Office of Accessibility over at Salesforce, and her journey as a disabled person has really allowed her to combine her passion for accessibility and also her passion for events, which I love to hear. So welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, Jessica. It's been amazing working with you at Salesforce events. Just a quick intro. My name is Amy Wood, and as Jessica mentioned, I am disabled. I have been deaf since I was 5 months old. I lost all of my hearing when I had spinal meningitis. And I grew up in a hearing family, so I use speaking as a way to communicate, and I don't know sign language. And my first job was in events, so I love events. I love planning parties and meetings and really going above and beyond to make people feel included. And because I'm deaf, I also understand what it's like to experience barriers in events. So I get to work in the Office of Accessibility, where we get to focus on making sure that Salesforce products and experiences are accessible to people with disabilities. So I'm really excited to talk about those insights today with you.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Yes, I've worked with Amy on numerous events, and Dreamforce being one of them, and her passion for events and including accessibility at every turn is just so top-notch that I wanted to talk to her and bring her into this conversation. So Amy, can you talk to us a little bit about high-level disabilities and how, us as planners can be thinking about how we can accommodate for folks, outside of the realm of our own maybe understanding of what accessibility is?
Absolutely. So we do try to cover all of the spectrums of each disability. So I'll start with people that are blind or have low vision. So a number of people have low vision where it may be difficult to see too far in front of them, but there's also people that have color blindness or heightened sensitivity to bright colors, or even variations in brightness perception. So people with vision disability doesn't mean that they're blind or have vision loss, but they may have some sort of difficulty that challenges their vision. Same for people that are deaf or hard of hearing. There's a wide range of hearing loss. There are some people that maybe have lost a little bit of hearing as they've gotten older, or maybe some veterans that lost hearing when they were in battle. So those are some people that may not know sign language as they've gradually lost hearing through their lives. But there's also people with tinnitus, which is a ringing or a buzzing in their ears, and it's really painful, that can also interfere with hearing. And then there's also the opposite of what I have, which is hyperacusis. And I'm not saying that right, but that is people who find ordinary noises way too loud. So they're very sensitive to ordinary sound. We also talk about people with physical disabilities. I think a lot of us assume that people with physical disabilities will be using a wheelchair, but only 70% of people with physical disabilities do not use a wheelchair. So they are ambulatory, but they still have a physical impairment. That could include somebody with spinal cord injuries or multiple sclerosis. But there are people with physical disabilities that do use wheelchairs, such as cerebral palsy and other disabilities that might impact their way to move freely. We also have people with mental illness. That covers people with depression and anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. And then we also want to make sure that we're including people in the neurodiverse community. And neurodivergence is not considered a medical or a mental health diagnosis. It describes when somebody's brain works just a little bit differently than the average person. This could include somebody with attention deficit disorder, autism, dyslexia, and dyscalculia, which is difficulty with math. And then lastly, I'll just wrap it up with people that have medical conditions. They can also be impacted by events. This can be somebody who has diabetes, or somebody who's pregnant or nursing, somebody that might have cancer or other types of medical conditions. And the number one symptom of medical conditions is fatigue, followed by blurred vision and pain in their legs. So we really want to take into account all these spectrums of disabilities and medical conditions that can be impacted by our events.
Wow. Yes. Thank you so much for bringing all those accessibility challenges forward, because, you know, I am an able-bodied person planning an event, not really having those thoughts of planning for someone who has tendonitis or, you know, those things that I don't really have top of mind. So it's so important to have you and your team to work with to help us pre-plan and help event teams really think through and very thoughtfully on how to plan an event for all, an inclusive event. And I think your team does an amazing
somebody
job.
Who's a deaf person, I don't know what it's like for somebody who's blind, or I don't know what it's like for somebody that uses a wheelchair. So it's really been an eye-opening experience for me to be able to learn about all of these disabilities and the spectrum within each one, and to understand the accommodations and access layers that will help each individual person.
Right, totally. And even before we hit record or, you know, started recording this session today, Amy was telling me about, you know, just ways that your team has really helped the pre-planning phase of events to make events more accessible. And that can even start with emails, right? That can start with the inclusive words that we use. When I was working on the events team, I think you joined one of the content meetings and even talked about like the colors that you use on the websites or on graphics. So can you talk a little bit about those ways that planners or folks who are, you know, thinking about planning events, what things that they can use even before we get on site to start making our events more inclusive?
Absolutely. So I'll give you a couple of tips and tricks here. There's how to pre-plan, and then I'll also provide accommodation that should be provided in every event. So for pre-planning, the number one thing you want to do is collect accommodation requests at the time of registration. This is huge. This allows the person to tell you exactly what they need, and it takes the guessing game out of it for you. And I've had people ask me, can you really do this for a 40,000 person event? And the answer is yes. For Dreamforce, we had 40,000 people, and I think we probably had about 200 requests come in. But fortunately, many of those requests were already embedded into the event, such as somebody that uses a wheelchair. Most venues are already accessible with elevators and ramps, or somebody that has dietary restrictions. And so most of our catering menus allowed for people that are vegan or gluten-free and what have you. So there's really great benefit to collecting accommodation requests at the time of registration. It's just a quick question right there in the registration. Do you need an accommodation related to a disability or medical condition? And you want to be very clear about medical condition and disability, because a lot of people accommodations mean hotel or travel.
Yes, true.
So
true.
just a little tip there. And then another thing that you can do for pre-planning is provide basic training for the event staff to support people with disabilities. This is a really easy way just to make sure that everyone has awareness of how to assist somebody with a disability. It can be really intimidating to ask someone if they need help. And the best way you can do is just say, I'll be here until 4 p.m. if you need assistance. You know, you don't want to go up to someone and say, here, let me do that for you, or let me take this for you, you know. So providing this basic training and disability etiquette can really empower your event staff to help the best way possible. And then when you're talking about designing the event, there's a couple of different guidelines online that are really helpful for designing the event. You want to make sure that you're observing web content accessibility guidelines for all of your digital content, also known as WCAG. These guidelines will help you make sure that you're designing all of the content online, your web pages and your emails, to make sure that people with disabilities can consume this content. And it'll help you with things like avoiding rapid animations, flashing lights, and bright colors. And then when you're designing the event, you also want to make sure that you're building processing times and breaks into the agenda. Another thing for pre-planning, a really great thing that we did for Dreamforce, we created a what to expect webpage with detailed information. This was really exciting. And it had things like the schedule, the agenda, the venue size, the number of people, where the exits are, lactation room, what the accommodations were, and where you can go for support. It used inclusive language and imagery to really kind of describe the journey through the day. So, event can be really intimidating for people without disabilities. So for someone with a disability, this what to expect page will kind of help them plan their journey and know what's ahead of them. And then the last thing I'll say for pre-planning is speaker coaching. Speaker coaching has been really phenomenal in making sure that we're taking disability inclusion to heart when the speakers are up there on stage. It can include things like inclusive language, making sure that we're not using phrases and words that can be offensive or outdated for the disabled community. It also includes things like face forward when you're talking, speak naturally, make sure that you're speaking into the microphone if you have one. And another part of speaker coaching is making sure that you're helping the speaker as well, because stage fright is real. So by providing speaker coaching tips, it can help alleviate their anxiety when they have to get up on stage. I know that when I get really nervous, my voice gets really shaky, or I might talk really fast. So these kind of things have helped me slow down a little bit and make sure that I'm speaking clearly enough for my audience to understand.
So good.
Yeah.
And that's, that's the even before we get on site, right? So there's so much to think about. And, I love knowing all the information that I can have even before I go. I don't know if I'm like a claustrophobic person, or, if I wasn't working in events, I probably wouldn't go to Dreamforce, but, you know what I mean? But because, our team just does, or when I was on the content team, they did such a great job of prepping folks. And so I think that goes right into what you're talking about, with providing as much information as you can provide, as much as we know we can share, just to allow people more planning on their end, or making them feel less nervous about the process.
Absolutely. It was very overwhelming for a lot of people, even without disabilities. So having that information ahead of time really just helped them know what to expect. So I think that was really helpful.
Yeah.
And then I'm talking about accommodations that can be provided in every event. And there's a couple of them that I have on the list here. The number one accommodation that I find helpful is captions. Having captions on the screens are really incredible. I learned that 70% of people that use captions aren't even deaf or hard of hearing. Maybe someone who, if English is not their first language, captioning can be really helpful. Or if someone has ADHD and might have missed something, they can look at the captioning to refer what was said. Or if someone is all the way in the back of an auditorium and they can't quite hear the speaker, the captions are there and really beneficial to help them. For Dreamforce, I think we had 9, maybe 10,000 people in a room. So, if you're all the way in the back of the room, maybe it was difficult to hear. So I will always encourage caption in all of your keynotes and your breakout session, but it can be expensive. So we used AI caption for all of our breakout sessions this year, which was really great at Dreamforce. It was a really great way to use AI and then also a cost-saving method to incorporate accessibility. And then step-free access in the venue is always important. Fortunately, many venues and buildings now are created with the ADA guidelines in mind, Americans with Disabilities Act. This requires all of our buildings to make sure that they are accessible to people with disabilities. So fortunately, that's not something you have to worry about. But there are some areas that might have a step or a stage that is inaccessible. So if we have a speaker that is getting up on stage and they're using a wheelchair, we need to make sure there's a ramp or a lift for them to get up on the stage. But also step-free access benefits people that don't use wheelchairs. Maybe they have a bad knee, or they're pregnant, or they have crutches. So it's just a bigger benefit than just, people with wheelchairs. And then I mentioned the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. This defines how to make digital content more accessible to people with disabilities. And it goes beyond people with disabilities, but it also includes visual disabilities, auditory, physical, speech, cognitive, language, learning, and neurological disabilities. There's just a huge spectrum of how we can be creating our material so that all of these people can use that content and consume it comfortably. So, for example, for someone who's blind, if they're using a screen reader, we need to make sure that our web pages are structured in a way that makes sense. You know, you have your heading, and then you have your subheading, and then you may have tabs that need to be ordered in a specific way. We want to make sure that the screen reader is reading that aloud in a way that makes sense to the person who is blind. But also, if somebody who has a physical disability has a difficult time using a mouse, and they might need to use a keyboard to navigate. So we need to make sure that the web page can be navigated using a keyboard in a way that makes sense. Or somebody who is deaf, making sure that all of the ads and the content and videos have captioning on there. So that was the accommodations. And the last one is I will include speaker coaching again. There's more things that we can be doing, such as saying, you know, you want to explicitly mention an area on the slide. Instead of saying, look here or click here, you want to say, look on the top left corner of the slide. This would be really helpful for people that might have a vision disability who might not know where you're pointing to. And then you also want to describe all of your relevant images as if you're on the phone. This is really helpful for people that have disabilities. Yeah, to any images that carry information, just describe it as if you're on the phone, a quick 1 or 2 sentence. This is helpful for people with vision disabilities, but also anybody that's maybe listening in on the phone if they can't attend, but they're listening in on a conference call. So this helps make sure that they can access that content as well.
I love that. Every time we talk, I just learn something completely new that blows my mind and that I can start using like right away. That's a great point. Something else that you mentioned in like some of the content owner calls is, and these are pretty low cost ways that you can make your event more inclusive. And Amy listed out an amazing list right there. But low cost ways to make your event more inclusive is with inclusive language. Can you talk a little bit about that and just ways that within a presentation or within that speaker training folks can maybe adjust or just be more aware of the words that they're using in their presentation?
Absolutely. So we know that language is constantly evolving, and we're understanding ways that our former language may be offensive or exclusionary to people with disabilities. So when you're reviewing your content through an inclusive language lens, you can ensure that you're not excluding or offending members of your audience that have a disability. Some examples of phrases that might be offensive or problematic may be like turning a blind eye, falling on deaf ears, from paralysis to performance. These are ways that we're taking clinical diagnosis and making them as into an adjective almost. Or somebody who says, I'm so OCD, you know, there are people that really struggle with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, you know, who maybe might not be able to leave their house, or, you know, their lives are very affected. So when we say I'm so OCD, we're kind of minimizing the experience there. So really just making sure that we're not using a disability or a medical condition to reference something that we're saying about ourselves, unless you actually have it. So instead of saying, you know, I'm so OCD, you could say, I'm super neat, or, you know, keep changing the agenda. So he's bipolar, you could just say he's indecisive. And, you know, just little things like that. And then also the word crazy had been, you know, kind of eliminated from the language. There are people who struggle with mental illness and they've been called crazy their whole life before they've been diagnosed. And so that word can be kind of triggering for people. So instead of saying crazy, what a crazy day, you could say, this is what a wild day, or what a fun day. And then there's other words like crazy, like insane or nuts. Those also kind of have the same connotation, where people have been called insane or nuts. So just trying to really figure out what exactly it is that you're trying to say there and find that disability-friendly word there. So as I said, inclusive language is constantly evolving, and there's so many resources online where you can find, you know, guidelines on what inclusive language is and what's acceptable to say and what's not acceptable to say. And I will say, all of us say it. I've said it. I've said things in the past that I didn't realize could be offensive. And the best thing you can do is just quickly apologize and then ask what the right thing is to say if someone calls you out.
Very true. Yeah, when you came and spoke, I think that was like my biggest takeaway is just the words that I don't even realize that I'm using, but I
Mhm.
say. And so it's just been such a I don't know, a more intentional process of the
Mhm.
words that I use. So thank you so much for bringing
Oh,
this forward in a very like kind way.
mm.
And you also allow people to ask questions or if they're not understanding a certain um, process that you use or framework that you use, you're always so willing to share and explain why.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
of course.
It's really
Well, we
helpful.
might have to have a second conversation, a
I
part
think
two,
so.
because I have so many more notes on things that I would love to have you talk to us about. So if you're open to that, we might have to do a part two. Um, but what are some ways that, resources or ways that people can maybe follow you or get a hold of you if they do have follow-up questions?
Absolutely.
Any
Well,
good
you can
ways?
find me on LinkedIn. I
Yes.
love connecting with people on LinkedIn. I think it's just so much fun when people reach out and, meeting with like-minded people or people that want to learn. I think that's one
Yes.
of my favorite things to do. My LinkedIn is Wood 903. So if you do www.linkedin and then /Wood 903, you can find me there,
Perfect.
or Amy Wood by putting my name in as well.
So
I'm
good.
thrilled. And I
And we'll also share that in the comments. We'll tag Amy in here, and so you all can go and follow her. The content that you share on LinkedIn is super valuable as well. So if you're looking to jumpstart your accessibility or inclusivity within events, Amy's your go-to. So thank you so much, Amy. This was so great to bring this conversation forward. Um, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us in our conversation, and I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.